Hey everyone, welcome to More Than Numbers Live, the data show focused on turning data teams from support functions into engines of growth. I'm Ollie Hughes. I'm one of the co-founders of Count.co. We're a Canvas-based BI tool. We're all about turning data teams from dashboard factories into their organization's problem solvers. Each week, I have the joy of interviewing another data leader who's driving massive value into their organization, and this week is no different. This week, I've got Lina Mikolajczyk. She's the head of analytics at Bumble. She's an absolute badass. She's one of the most fierce data leaders I know. She's had previous roles at Moo, Dojo, and Hilton hotels, building data teams and driving value with them. And today, she's going to talk us through how she's done that many times over, how to drive data team value when you're first into your new role. Lina, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
How was that for intro?
Yeah, I would say you compete with me on the badassery, but I might beat you on that one. I'm not sure.
Well, I'll put it this way. I think I love working with you because you absolutely have no BS at all in what you do. Everything you do is focused. It's really, really great. So the first thing I want to ask guests, it's just an icebreaker question, which is really fun to get different answers. Just tell us the first BI tool you started using, maybe loving, that isn't Excel.
Everyone says Excel. So for me, it was Google Analytics, like OG version 1 Google Analytics, and it was the love of my life. I did every course. I showed up to every meeting with it, taught on it.
That's a good answer. I love that answer. That suggests the marketing bent that I know that you have a bit of passion for. I'm going to ask you what you think about GA4. Let's park that one for another, like the outtakes perhaps, but I love it. I think that's a good one. It's amazing how much you can do with that tool. If people are data analysts and they're sort of stuck in SQL, Google Analytics is a tool it's so powerful. It's an enormously powerful tool. There's a reason Google will do what they do in many ways. It's another example of that.
And so many analysts discount tools like Google Analytics because, you're not doing raw SQL, but you are doing analysis. It is still data science. It is still drilling into the 5 whys. And my one piece of advice for any analyst starting out would be pick up one of these tools because they are the foundation of what so many of your stakeholders actually deal with because they're not seeing the SQL, they're not seeing the Python that you write.
And it's I must admit, I haven't looked at the GA4 UI since they launched it. I'm in SQL, but certainly the it's also a UI which has been battle tested. Like every single possible use case, they have thought through and built out with custom UI because they know the answer. They can't give you SQL, so they have to get. So it's amazing to see how battle worn it is, and it can answer all the key questions any organization can generally want. It's maybe painful to get there, but it's all in the UI. It's an amazing breadth of UI there. As a bit of design.
Chatter online against GA4 is pretty bad. But that doesn't mean it's a bad tool. It just means people have a lot of strong opinions.
We won't Google. Hopefully YouTube when they upload this won't block us for that particular comment. But I got it. Yeah, sure. Well, there you go. That's a good start. So let's move on. I want to set the scene. Currently, you're at Bumble. Obviously, you've formed and run data teams at different organizations as well. We'll dive into that later. But just gives a sense of Bumble now, running analytics there. Tell us the data stack, tell us the organization structure, how's the kind of lay the scene for us about where you are at the moment.
Yeah, so just to start us off, so Bumble is the dating app. It's also used as a friendship app, Bumble BFF, and there's also a business component to it. We also have Badoo, which is another dating app. And then a couple of other apps, including Geneva, which is more for community building. So as you can imagine, we deal with vast amounts of data of people, swiping on each other, chatting to each other, doing all sorts of stuff in the app. So we have a big data team. Our data team now is composed of analytics and data science, which is different types of analysts in terms of skill sets, but focus on primarily the analytical side. There's some core data science skills that are everything from just the ML side of training and deploying models, but also just deep advanced statistical analysis of different trends. And then we have analytics engineering and then data platform. The way we're structured is we have analytics and data science and analytics engineering together under the operational function, and then data platform and machine learning sits with engineering. And it's great, actually, because the teams work really closely together. But the operational alignment allows us to be really close to the business and feed that back to the data platform, which can tend to be somewhat removed. But we run, very closely as a team. In terms of our stack, so when I joined about 2 years ago, we were running on some pretty out-of-date infrastructure. We were fundamentally on-prem, and we have been on a journey for the past 2 years to level up and bring on new tooling that's more relevant for the analyst talent that we have and for the needs of the business. So we're now in a position where we have Looker as well as Count. We use dbt. For all of our analytics engineering needs, we use Monte Carlo. And there's quite a few more tools that we're currently exploring to just continue the modernization and to continue to increase self-service, but also just enable productivity within the analysts and data scientists.
That's a great summary. Yeah, it's amazing actually. Like though, what's amazing about that story is obviously you're now on like top quality tooling like Count. Thanks for the drop, but actually like the Bumble's done a huge amount with relatively old tooling. Like it actually, in fact, it's not like the best in class tooling was necessarily the biggest differentiator of performance. It's obviously got a lot better since then. I'm sure it's driving even more value, but I think that's one of the things I noticed when I first started talking to you, actually, that Bumble had grown a lot with a relatively old stack and done very well with it up to a certain point, which is kind of interesting thought. I always thought in some ways.
With all this tooling, right? Exactly. And so like with all this new tooling, there's also a cultural component to it, right? So it's what's the old saying? Like you can change all the tech you want, but until you change the people, it doesn't really matter. And with changing towards this like data heavy focus, diagnostic focus, and enabling self-service and enabling like just quickness of insights and being able to act means the whole business has had to really lean into that. And that I think is what has driven the pace and the momentum of being able to change so quickly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's also so interesting. I love to ask a question about it if I can to help people. Like you mentioned, you have like sort of very advanced machine learning deployment of models and analytics kind of separate. It's kind of quite normal to have that. Have you really got a clear defining line? I know that everyone strays into both buckets, right? Analytics can stray, data science can stray. Is it quite a defining wall, or is it actually quite fluid?
I would say it's pretty fluid. I think that just like with any company, right? Like the opportunities are there if you take them, right? So if you are working on something that is a deep dive, but the outcome of it is, do you know what? This could actually be like operationalized as a model, and like we could push it into this and this and this domain. I have that expectation out of my analysts to be able to identify those opportunities, and if they are so inclined to advance in that way, to take that, right? And if they're not, because they don't have the interest, don't have the skills or whatever, then either put it on your growth path or like feed it back to the team as an opportunity that has been identified that we need to do something about because it will bring business value. But that's kind of how we operate the team is like, the analysts are out there to help support, be strategic partners to all these stakeholders, but also to identify these opportunities.
Yeah. You got to have that full from deployment model all the way through to the stakeholder and the business problem all the way through. That's cool. That's cool. Thank you. That seemed really well. I mean, so what we're going to talk about today is links to all the things you discussed. Then you discussed like tool stack changing, organizational change, organizational layout. All these things are part of like how I guess as you joined Bumble as a data leader and started running those things. It's been a big lift. And I just want to spend some time with you talking through if a new data leader is going to join an organization, how to approach what can feel like a pretty daunting task. All those things by themselves are big. Doing them as a new role in a new organization at once is amazing. So let's maybe spend some time talking about that. And just to remind people as we talk about this podcast, we're focusing on data team value, and our framework for that is the tenets of data team value. So there's 4 tenets. There's operational clarity, the idea that data teams should be driving signal from noise, making the business feel simple, not just producing loads and loads of reports, which mean nothing, solving business problems, not just being a data portal, spending time with the business, minimizing decision time rather than just being a kind of a data product environment, and then measuring yourself rather than doing things a data team can't see. You're instead showing value and driving ROI. And I really, that fourth one is really what we're talking about today, particularly under the lens of joining a new organization. So, I mean, Lina, I'm going to throw over to you. You've in many different industries and many different times in your career, you've come into an organization and led teams and driven organizational change. Like, as we've discussed it, it's one of those things which is, it can feel incredibly daunting to join a new company that way with that kind of leadership responsibility. And not least because measuring impact, proving what you're doing is driving value is always just an age-old question with data teams. How do I prove ROI? And so, I mean, it just makes that kind of expectation stuff at the beginning is just really difficult. How do we even think about it? How have you done that in Bumble and maybe in other roles as well? How have you led that change? And we could just drill into that for a bit.
Well, that's a loaded question, right? So let's maybe start from the beginning. So I think let's just have a situation. You are a new leader. You have joined a company, and all you know is what's on the job description, right? Like, say it's senior manager of data or head of analytics, whatever it is.
Yeah,
you don't really know like what your aim and what your outcome looks like at this point. You may have had some like onboarding from your manager or whatever, but like you don't really know which way to move. Like, do I need to handle the data stack? Do I need to look at the people? Are there specific projects that I'm going to be deployed to? And it can be really overwhelming at the beginning to kind of identify what is the number one thing that I'm going to do that plays up to my skills but helps drive the most business value. And what I would recommend for anybody starting out is take a really deep look at what you're working with. And what I mean by that is at your first month, everyone just throws everything at you. Oh, you're new. You're like a shiny new toy. Like, you could be on this project. You can help here. Oh, you're a data person. You can help with that. Take everything. Yeah.
And meeting is also really important, right? Doing that kind of meet and greet, but just being completely blinded by what everyone's saying is part of the task, I guess.
Have a 90-day plan. And your 90-day plan is this. First of all, focus on your stakeholders. Meet absolutely everyone. I'm talking, do not do work. Like, go and meet as many people in the business as possible. Head of FP&A to the salesperson. Go shadow an ops person. Go sit with the product team. Get to know the business. Understand how people view data, how they use it, and what their biggest gaps are. And note everything, right? Like, take vast amounts fill up a whole notebook of your insights from the conversations that you're having. Basically conduct interviews, because when you're new, you have the direct ability to ask those kind of candid questions, and you can play it off as, well, I'm new, so I'm just asking this question. But use that to your advantage. So do that. Spend a lot of time with stakeholders. Have this anecdotal stuff written down. Number 2, spend time with your team, and don't just get to know them personally, which is a given, but get to know the projects that they enjoy, the projects that they thought they brought the most value in, the projects that they think they grew the most by doing, the projects they hated. Have a very well-rounded view of the team, but then through that, be able to analyze what their actual competencies are. This analyst, you know what? They're a great communicator. Technically, they're a little bit less so, but you start defining who is good at what, because that starts to formulate a view in your eyes of how can I combine different skill sets to be able to push a project along. So if I have a project which requires a lot of cross-functional collaboration, but also communication and socialization with, execs all the way down to every layer of the business, I might want to pick an analyst or 2 analysts, one who is like the technical counterpart who will, help do the analysis, do the modeling, whatever. And then a more communication heavy expert who can help translate that to the wider business. So you need to do that assessment of the competencies of your team as kind of your second step. Then your third step, and this is, by the way, you have to do this in your first 90 days. If you take any longer than that, you will not do it, right? So
you've got a grace window. You've got a grace window when you can play the naive card and just learn and listen, absorb, and then people are going to start expecting things. Yeah, got you. Yeah,
90 days, you're OG, man. Like, you're part of the building. You can't get away with it. So the third step, though, is the pivotal step, and that is the survey, right? And the survey is intended to be sent to the wider business. and it needs to be brutally honest, and you need to be prepared to receive the kind of feedback you're going to receive. For some businesses, that this might be the first time that kind of survey has been conducted. I know in my previous 3 businesses, the first time I set the survey out, it was brutal feedback. It may or may not have made me and my heads cry. And I may have considered switching careers. But you know what? It sure as hell set the baseline of what things I need to do in order to progress the team. So let me tell you a little bit more about the survey.
Please, yeah. The survey, by the way, just to clarify for everyone who's listening, Lina has given us a template of this survey, so you can go do this yourself. We have a complete playbook on this survey that you can find in the show notes. So with that in mind, now go through the survey, the gold survey.
So the survey needs to focus on what you think are the analytical maturities of the business and where you think you fit into that. So maybe I can take a step back and describe what I mean. Because you've done all these interviews with stakeholders and analysts, you're getting a clear sense of where the business is at different domain levels in terms of their analytical maturity. Maybe this is a good time to show a view of what I mean by analytical maturity.
Yeah. Let's bring up the slide. That's wonderful.
So
here we go.
There you go. This is the analytics maturity curve. And basically what it does is it describes the movement of data through an organization in terms of its complexity of usage. So, at the beginning, you just have the data. So it's sitting in servers, it's sitting in warehouses, wherever. Then you do something with it. So you transform it, you cleanse it. Maybe you start automating stuff. Then you actually surface it for people, whether it be Power BI, Tableau, Looker, whatever, Count. But it's being shown to others outside of the data team. And then you keep progressing by adding more and more. You start actually using the data towards other things. So maybe it's a statistical model, maybe it's a deep dive analysis, maybe it's something that self-replicates, maybe it's a machine learning model, maybe it's et cetera, et cetera. And as you move up the maturity,
decision output, you've got raw data through to what's going on to decision, some degree of automated decision or manual decision making. Yeah, I got it. This is awesome.
Yeah, and the last part is data is actually linked to ROI, meaning you've created a data product and it is self-generating of some sort of business outcome, which could be a cost efficiency or it could be a revenue growth. So something like a recommendation engine is monetizable because it is a data product that enables you to grow revenue by X amount, right? So you have to think about this curve. And when you're doing all these interviews and these assessments, you have to take a deep look at where you think the company is, and different domains, product, marketing, what revenue might be in different areas, but have a little table that just gives your perspective on where you are.
Yeah.
And there are assessments online that we can link to where you can do this in a more formulaic approach, but your anecdotal evidence will suffice for your take, right? So
yeah, like the rule of 5 kind of thing. If you see a pattern of 4 out of 5 times, it's going to be pretty statistically likely to be a real thing.
Exactly. And then when you do the survey, you cater it towards where you think you are in the maturity curve. So, you send out a survey. Say you think you're more kind of in the self-service and maybe you've got some stats going on in some places. Then you might ask about, how impactful do you find the data team? How much are you using the data to do your day-to-day job? How many times a week are you blocked by the lack of data? What do you think about the services of the data team? But you need to get kind of your data team on board with this and talk about why this is going to be valuable. And what I would recommend, and I've definitely instilled in my teams, is the baseline outcome of these surveys, which you should do on a regular basis, is what composes your OKRs or your objectives or whatever your company uses. So you should measure yourselves based on the outcomes of the survey.
Yeah. See, this survey basically becomes like a baseline of your business. Like the first 90 days, we know we've got a sense of where the biggest areas are. We've baselined ourselves, and you can show improvement every quarter, whatever, how often you do it. Is basically the idea. And I guess just to help, I guess you want us to be anonymous, but I'm assuming you want to get a sense of which part of the organization is answering the certain way, because that helps you understand how to engage with the right bits of the business, the right level of maturity. Because not everyone's going to be straight to predictive models. Some just need access in a different way. So it just gives you that whole map of decision types, workflow problems that are coming up, or at least gives you a big heat map for that, which is amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And you should, like, if you're using Workday or something similar, like, you should be able to integrate like what department the person answering is on. I would advise making it anonymous, because you want the most brutal feedback that you can get. And you also have to be prepared for what you receive, because it might not be. One of the most interesting things is, like, I think a lot of data teams have a self-perception that is different than the business perception. And having a survey really helps dispel that.
And I love it. You're not letting the business dictate what your value is, but this is just an input for you to work out a strategy to move them on in the way they might not even know they need to be. What generally I find data teams forget is that they get stuck on one of these areas, like self-service. I must enable self-service. And they forget there's a whole distribution of workflows, whole distribution of decision types that they could be optimizing at different levels of maturity, different levels of detail, strategic to operational. And this survey gives you that full heat map, basically, of a way to see all the different types of data engagements and where the problems are that you can drive impact to. This is really cool. This is really good. And so that you've given us, I think actually previously you've given us a bit of a deep dive and a template that people can use to build their own surveys from, which you can find in the show notes. It is an amazing document. I really can't recommend enough that you take that up. Even if you're not, I guess you're saying, even if you're not new in the first 90 days, you could still adopt this kind of strategy to start baselining for yourself where you are, right? It's not just a 90-day thing, as good as that is to do then. And
especially if you're doing a lot of modernization work where the impacts aren't going to be immediately felt by the business, it's a good way to measure like the impact that the business perceives out of the work that you're doing. I would also say that the survey and the interviews are alone not enough to measure true data impact. And there's a lot of literature on this, and everyone has a different opinion, but there is something to be said about really getting your analysts and data scientists and whoever it is to get that feedback loop from stakeholders on stuff that they produce, whether it's a data product, dashboard analysis, whatever, and understanding the impact it made on their decision. So say you've put together, I don't know, a geographical data set that is now being used by marketing for hyper-local, like marketing campaigns or something. You want to know what that drove so you can go, hey, we built this data set. It enabled marketing to drive X amount of revenue as a result. Yeah. And you can use that in combination with the outcomes of the survey to be like, here's the revenue I'm driving, here's the cost efficiencies I'm driving, and here's what people think of and use our data for.
I think that's great. I often, the ROI question is a never-ending question, and I don't think it should ever go away. I think what I've observed myself is that the people who are trying to attempt some degree of measurement, be that qualitative, in fact, it's often better qualitative in some ways than quantitative, are the ones who don't need to justify their ROI as much to the business. It's the ones who don't do anything or try and get overly scientific, where you just get lost in the weeds rather than just actually just being open to feedback and just thinking about it. Like it's a continual, it's a principle rather than a number in many ways. And I think that's places that really well. That is so great. Thank you so much. The last question I want to ask on this topic before we move on, if I can, is just expectation management. That's one of the biggest worries I think people have when they come into a new role. I often hear is people saying, how do I manage my leadership's expectations of me and how fast we can change? Have you got anything on that which is like particularly important? Maybe it's like that first 90 days. How do you make sure that your exec team or the people that you're reporting into about data recognize and baseline their own expectations, because they may be looking to go very quickly, but maybe that's not realistic? How have you done that before that's come up?
I think the key thing, and the thing I think many analysts and analytical people struggle with, is over communication. And I giggle because it's the one thing that my own leadership team, they always laugh, because I always say, how many times did we communicate about this? How widely did we socialize? What's the frequency on any topic? It's the thing that I think people die by. Like if your execs don't know that something's delayed, don't know the timelines, don't have a deep understanding, they're never going to have a deep understanding of like the day-to-day of what it takes to get something across. But if you can have a timeline and set the expectations and communicate when those expectations are not going to be met or there are delays, and you can be very clear around the why, they won't mind the delays. Like I think people are very afraid of actually bringing forward mistakes or bringing forward communicating around delays and just hiding it instead. But like actually execs appreciate over communication. They're so busy in their day to day. They're going to read probably the first 2 lines of whatever message you send them. So, be clear and communicating that like, hey, this is what this is about. Read it in your spare time. But I can't like nail this home enough. Just the visibility to execs is what they value more than anything else.
Love it. Thank you. That's great. We'll move on. We've got a bit of time left. I'd love to just ask you, thinking right back to the beginning of your career, and one of the things that people might not know about you is that I think you started off as doing medicine and then switched to data, which to my wife, who's a doctor, is very intriguing to hear about. So maybe you can like when you first started out in data, what's the piece of advice that you give yourself that you now know about how to succeed in data? Maybe you give other people that you're mentoring now.
Well, funny enough, I used to say that the reason why I switched from medicine to data is because I don't like people, I like numbers. But as I grew in seniority, I realized that actually you really have to like people in order to do numbers. So I can't use that excuse anymore. But anyway.
You can just speak to people for the first 90 days of a job, so you literally can't backtrack on it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I've never looked back. I think this has always been my career path. I just didn't know it. But anyway, one of the things that I did when I was starting out was I spent a lot of time in an agency setting, and I was exposed there to multiple industries, data sets that were completely like disparate from each other, tools, and I had to navigate kind of every aspect of data from data eng to AE to more complex data science, et cetera. And I actually think that time spent there with the exposure of and the variability. So you might get that in consulting, you might get that in an agency setting, incubator type of stuff, is really valuable because it trains your mind to be able to apply core concepts to dissimilar systems, if that makes sense. So like, this is why I laughed at my first tool that I knew was Google Analytics, but the reality was it was also Amplitude and Mixpanel and, Adobe Analytics and et cetera, et cetera. And you kind of approach analysis and visualization and whatnot across those tools in a similar way. But if you learn one tool well, you can apply the concepts across them all. So I would encourage all analysts starting out, like just being exposed to don't get yourself pigeonholed into, I am just this expert in this area, unless you very early on have decided that you want to very much specialize in a very niche field. That is an important differentiator for people. Like, do you want to be a more generalist analyst, or do you want to be a hyper specialist who does like, Adobe DTM tracking tags? They're different.
That makes total sense. Thank you. Right, I've got one more thing for you before we go, and that's anonymous data letters from the community. I've asked people that, I told people that we were interviewing you, and I got a few questions back, and I love this one if I can ask it to you. Are you ready? It's here's the paper. Here's the question. I'm an analytics leader running a small team of analysts. I've become increasingly convinced that over the next 3 to 4 years, my EQ, I guess emotional intelligence and soft skills, are going to be more important for me and my team than technical ones. ChatGPT, anyone? What are the most important soft skills Lina thinks my team or any team should be developing? I guess. So how does that sound as a question? Soft skills.
Yeah. I mean, number one is what I said before, which is being a very strong communicator. That is the number one skills. And a communicator that's able to flex based on seniority levels. You speak differently to an exec than you do to a VP or director, than you do to, an IC. And you should recognize what it takes to flex between those levels. Number one is communication. And I would say number two is like being an opportunity seeker and an opportunity solver. So a lot of people fall into the mistake of, I've identified this problem. What do I do about it? Don't be a problem identifier. Be an opportunity seeker and a problem solver.
Love it. If I could throw my own 2 cents on this, I would say the thing I see most differentiated for people in soft skills is just critical thinking and problem solving structures, like just structuring an argument, structuring methodically. It just to like back to communication to yourself and communication to others about where you've got to an answer. That's great. Thank you so much, Lina. It's been such a joy to speak to you. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to hear more from Lina, you can find more about who she is, where she is on LinkedIn, etc., in our show notes, along with Lina's amazing stakeholder survey. That is a thing you must try out. You can find all about that in the show notes. Check us out at count.co/MTN, and also feel free to check out Count. Thank you, Lina.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.